Have you ever noticed that there is always that one arc, major arc of a gacha game that is incomplete or feels very dissatisfying as a player? I had that happen to me now, I think a few times. I mean, obviously, I'm not a super experienced gacha player or even a regular gamer. So this could just be from a very inexperienced point of view from someone who's still dipping their toes into the gacha world. But I did notice a few things from a story perspective, especially as someone who's addicted to consuming lots and lots and lots and lots of stories. I can never stop fulfilling my story addiction. But either way, before I do get into that, I do want to open my tea party just for you. Who is that? It's Ririna, the so-called anime enthusiast fox. It's time to talk more about gacha games and fulfill my story addiction, so let's just get started. As I was saying earlier, there's always that one major arc in a gacha game that just isn't satisfying from someone who's consuming the story. And usually it's either incomplete or just pacing-wise it's just too slow or it's just dissatisfying overall. And it's usually either the second or third arc. Of course, there are some exceptions where the beginning to maybe like third are just completely slow and it's just so difficult to get through until you like reach that one point where it finally gets really good. Like for example, Genshin Impact, Wuthering Waves is actually one that I would include now. And what else? Honkai Impact 3rd, Arknights. Those are like some of the ones that I would say are kind of like that. Of course, for Arknights, it's very much similar to the visual novel style, Japanese visual novel style of storytelling. So I can see why like some games would follow that kind of, I guess, storytelling style, which is why it's like that. But I'm talking in particular to one arc that feels very incomplete. And that just always seems to be prevalent in the gacha games that I've tried so far. And I do wonder if it's just something that gacha games fall into, like the problem, or if it's just a intentional storytelling aspect from the writing team that they have in mind that'll then blow our minds later down the road. We just don't know it yet. At least that's what I'm assuming. So when I actually think about it, you know how it's usually major arc number 2 or number 3? Like for example, in Blue Archive, volume 3, while the story is good, the only part that I don't feel very happy about is the lack of involvement that we ourselves have as the sensei in the story compared to like the first volume. Or even maybe the second volume. Now, that being said, when I do talk about that, it's usually just regarding chapter 1 of volume 3, because I haven't really finished it. Oh, wait, no, not volume 3. It was volume 2. Sorry about that. I'm kind of getting it mixed up. But volume 2, chapter 1 is the one that made me a little uncertain about it. Like, the pacing was good. That I had no problems with that. It was just the lack of involvement that we had. It was to the point where it felt like we could just be there or not be there and it wouldn't really matter to the story compared to volume 1 in Blue Archive. And that's what I feel is particularly incomplete in chapter 1. And I know for sure that I haven't finished volume 2 to really say that this lack of involvement that we have as a sensei is a good thing for chapter 1, since chapter 2 and 3 perhaps will be a bit different. But that's just my initial like example of what I mean by the curse of major arc number 2 in gacha games. And the next one that I could probably mention is actually Honkai Star Rail. One of the things that people complained about a lot was the Luofu arc, the Shenzhou Luofu. And I can actually understand where they're coming from, because when we start off the game, we're in Herta Space Station, and then we go to Yorilo 6, aka Billabong, and those two arcs are just, they're extremely strong and not bad, considering that they didn't really have a really good record when it comes to beginnings in their games, Hoyoverse games. I mean, I'm not saying that I don't like Hoyoverse games, because I do like them. It's just that their pacing for storytelling hasn't been one of their strengths. Not that it's needed, but as someone who's addicted to stories, I can't help but notice it. And although I can excuse it, because updates and then devs have to like push out content almost every 2 weeks or every month, and at that point I can't really blame them for having pacing issues. But if it's someone who's just playing the main story instead of the events or anything like that, it does feel very incomplete. And they have fallen into the hole, and this isn't just Shunjo Lufu, this is actually in every single arc that I've noticed, in particular for Honkai Star Rail, is that the beginning is always extremely slow. And I know that's intended, but for people who are casual gamers who just want them to go straight to the point, it's very dissatisfying, especially if you're playing the game by update rather than binge playing that some people might do, like I did in the past, honestly. So it does make me think about how Shunjo Lufu, first of all, it felt very incomplete, especially, I'm not going to spoil too much if you haven't played it and you plan on playing Honkai Star Rail, but the end of Shunjo Lufu feels extremely incomplete. And even if you have binge played it, there is some aspect to it. It's not as full and complete and in-depth compared to, let's say, Belobog, which is why when you finish Lufu, you're not as attached to the characters compared to Belobog or Herta Space Station. Surprisingly, I know that they probably have something else planned for Luofu in the future, but just looking at the first arc of Luofu is just not satisfying enough, even as a binge player, and most definitely as someone who has, played it by update instead of in one go. So I can see why some people have struggled to continue with Honkai Star Rail because of that. And I do know that they fixed some of the pacing issues from what I understand. But even then, Hoyoverse games tends to fall into the unfortunate realm of pacing issues. And that's why, and this is extremely prevalent in the Luofu arc. And because of their pacing issues, this is especially bad for them when it comes to the Luofu arc, because they chose to make it incomplete compared to the other arcs. Like Pinokoni, I'm pretty sure is probably a complete arc, which I haven't really finished though, so I can't really say. But from my understanding, it is a pretty fulfilling and very satisfying arc. Just like Belobog, because it's not incomplete, even if Pinokoni also had some pacing issues in the beginning. But then for Luofu, it's not only did it have pacing issues, which didn't help, but it was also very much incomplete in comparison to the other arcs, which is why I say that it's cursed, because that's the arc, or major arc of the game that just did not hit the spot, basically. And, it's not just Star Rail, though. Like, even if Hoyoverse games, get a lot of flack, they still are pretty strong overall. And just because one arc is not very satisfying doesn't mean the rest of the arcs aren't satisfying. So I do want to reiterate that. And Star Rail in general is a pretty entertaining game, and a lot of people enjoy it for a good reason. But it's just that one arc and the one aspect that a lot of gacha games fall into that I find to be very interesting, which is why I'm bringing it up here. And then the other one that I do want to talk about is actually Limbus Company. I don't know if you know that game, but if you're on my channel, then you probably know it because I play it. But Limbus Company also has that problem. It's not really the pacing that's the problem. It's less of an issue actually in this game. But the second volume, second canto, I guess second chapter for those who don't play the game. Chapter 2 is also one that feels very incomplete and not as satisfying. I'm not going to spoil too much, but chapter 1 has been very satisfying from beginning to end. It just hits a lot of points that you just want them to hit in such a dark, gritty game. But then in the second arc, it's intended for it to be a lighter chapter. But maybe because that's the case, it just feels very dissatisfying. And this makes me wonder if that's why they made the lighter chapters into mini chapters instead in the future updates of the game. called intervalos. I do wonder if that's why they made those intervalos extremely short, but also not that serious and something that can be quite easy to consume, just like what Canto 2 or Chapter 2 was like, because of the potential, I guess, lack of interest from people of the Roja arc, or I guess the Canto 2 arc. But it's one that I noticed is that if the arc is not at the level as the other arcs, and this is in general, then people deem that arc, regardless of its intention, like for example, if its purpose is to lighten up the atmosphere of the gameplay, then I'm sure it did a good job with that. Like if we look at it as a standalone, but overall it does make the people who have played the game for the purpose of the dark gritty, whatever it is that they want in the story, to be very dissatisfying and kind of annoying, I guess. I mean, I personally enjoyed Canto 2, but I can see people being extremely dissatisfied with Canto 2 in Limbus Company because of, and maybe even find it boring because they expected something as amazing and dark and emotional as Canto 1 or Chapter 1 and the other chapters. So I actually find it to be very smart of them to start including intervalos, 2 of them in particular, in between each canto, to lighten up the mood and so that it won't always be dark and gritty and, stressful in that case. So I do wonder if that's why they did it that way, and because they didn't want to have another cursed chapter or arc like what they did with the Roja arc, or even, I guess, Chapter 2, if we should call it that, for those who don't play the game. Because the problem with that one is that we don't get to learn about the character who's supposed to be the focus of that chapter enough. Like we understand some of her past, but it's not in a way that is very satisfying and involved compared to the first chapter. So it very much feels like, what is going on? Like, I expected this, but I got that instead? Like, what? So it kind of feels very incomplete in that sense. So now I think about it in a sense of gacha games tend to always have that one arc that they seemingly messed up on. I mean, it probably is intended to be. And what I mean by intended to be, I just mean the fact that it had a different purpose, but it didn't fly well with everyone. And so they would have to either like fix it in a future update, or they would need to actually, kind of change it in a way of the way that they pace things. Like, for example, what Limbus Company did with the intervalos as their way of lightening up the mood. Or if it's like Star Rail, where they kind of fix the pacing issue, but not really. And they just embrace the incompleteness. One or the other. Either way, they tend to feel very incomplete and can give pretty much unexpected expectations from people about how the rest of the story will go. Especially if they are playing it without interacting with the fandom. Like, the fandom can let you know, like, oh, this arc isn't very good, but the one after that is definitely good. And I can give examples of that with anime, like Kate Kyoshi Hitman Reborn. Like, the future arc is extremely good, but the daily life arc might put off some people if they don't like slice of life. So that's why I feel that it's very interesting that gacha games tend to have that one arc in the beginning where it's just so unexpectedly boring pacing wise, or it's just incomplete feeling, just dissatisfying to a lot of people. And so they end up getting a lot of drama and annoyances and like negative reviews and like things like that. I mean, it's not like the gacha game itself overall is bad, unless it's like super predatory and just not really has to do with the story itself. But it just goes to show that sometimes the writing team wants to do something with a good purpose, but then it just does not get accepted very well with people who are like, for example, casual players. Like, when you're a casual player, you do not want to read something super convoluted. And you just want something that's more direct and fast-paced and just overall an easy story to read, which is why I know a lot of people tend to want games with, a simple story. And even if it's simple, it has to be exciting and fast-paced, which is why I find that the Hoyoverse games pacing issues are something that I kind of wonder why they don't really improve it too. I mean, they are improving it little by little, but I don't know. Maybe I expected more from Star Rail, especially from the Luofu one, compared to like the Bellabog arc was really good, but still suffered from the slow pacing. And maybe because they want to have everyone experience all the functionalities of the game, that's why it ends up becoming or feels very slow. But at least that's just how I feel personally. Obviously, others might actually enjoy the slow pacing, but for me, I prefer my pacing of the stories to be pretty, I guess, consistent. Like, I don't mind slow to fast, which is why I play Hoyoverse games, but sometimes when you're consuming a lot of stories like me, because I'm a story addict, you kind of just want them to get to the point. Like, I don't need to know about every aspect of the game. Just give me the game story. I need it. So that's just something that I noticed. And I do wonder if there are other gacha games that also have this curse where one arc is just incomplete, pacing horribly and all that. But if there are, let me know down below. I really don't know what other gacha games are out there because there's so many, it seems. So if you have one that you recommend has a really good story, but also suffers from this curse, then let me know down below. Let's see if many people, knowing who views my videos, I'm pretty sure you guys play a lot of gacha games. At the very least, at least more than one. I'm like very certain of that. So I'm sure one of you guys can tell me what other games suffer from this curse, especially if you're also a story addict like me, or if there's actually something else that you noticed about gacha games that have a similar problem, aside from the gacha aspect, because that's always a problem, So anyways, what do you think of today's video? We discussed about the problems between gacha games, well, at least the ones that I play so far, and the curse that they have when it comes to major arc number 2 or 3. So let's etch this into our memory and keep it safe. And as always, formally inviting you to my next tea party. The so-called anime enthusiast Fox, who's that? This was Ririna. So until the next one then, bye!